Hello everyone, and welcome to today's webinar, How to Win More Jobs with Stunning Planning Proposals. My name is Andy Federer, VP of Marketing here at UrbanFootprint, and I'll be your host for today's webinar. I'm joined by our CEO and founder, Joe DeStefano, and by UrbanFootprint customers Kevin Tilbury, Senior Associate at Cambridge Systematics, Aaron Dominy, Principal at OHM Advisors, and Alyssa Sexton, Planner at OHM Advisors. Before we dive into today's topic, let's take a moment to walk through the agenda. First, Joe will give a quick intro to UrbanFootprint and how the software can help you streamline and enhance your proposal process. Then we'll hand it over to Kevin to discuss how UrbanFootprint helps Cambridge Systematics win more jobs with thousands of ready-to-map data sets. We'll hear from Aaron and Alyssa on how they've saved significant time on proposals with an accelerated existing conditions workflow. Finally, we'll wrap up with a live question and answer session. We do encourage you to ask questions during the webinar. Simply type your questions into the Q&A chat box and we'll do our best to answer them in the webinar or follow up with you after today's session. And with that, I'll hand it over to Joe.
Thanks, Andy. Great to be here. And for those of you that are new to us, I'm going to share just a bit about the team behind UrbanFootprint before we get going. Our company is built on a foundation of about 30 years of cutting-edge planning and design experience. Before starting UrbanFootprint, I ran the planning practice for Calthorpe Associates for more than 20 years. So as planners ourselves, we understand the bottlenecks and pain points in the planning process and have built UrbanFootprint to enable planners, designers, and analysts everywhere to apply sustainable and more time-efficient practices across the planning lifecycle. The software platform is used by planning teams across the country. We support planning at all scales, from the smallest cities to largest regional agencies, and from sole practitioners to the largest private planning and design consultancies. UrbanFootprint is also being used by planning and geography programs across the U.S., both to teach planning in classrooms and to power research activities, and this is something we're really excited about. Okay, so let's get to the platform itself. I'm just going to briefly review things here. UrbanFootprint is a web-based product and does not require any local software installs or IT support. It's accessed from anywhere with a web connection, and it's collaborative from the ground up. Like Google Docs, any number of people on your team can be in the platform and working on one or multiple projects at the same time. The platform can be used for land use, transportation, and climate action planning at all planning scales, from a few city blocks to corridors or whole jurisdictions or to counties and even regions. UrbanFootprint comes preloaded with clean, curated data, easy-to-use data forensics tools, a suite of built-in analytics models, and a scenario building toolkit that powers land use, transportation, and policy testing. It's loaded with parcel-level existing land use data from most of the U.S., neatly organized in what we call the UrbanFootprint base canvas. Then it comes with hundreds of additional reference layers that make it possible to get projects or proposals started quickly, or to make maps and perform existing conditions analyses. On top of that, built-in analysis tools measure everything from walk-in transit accessibility to energy and water use, emissions, and hazard risk. Users can measure existing conditions or build scenarios to test the impacts of land use changes, or if changing policies or technical assumptions such as energy or emissions rates typically addressed in climate action planning. In a nutshell, UrbanFootprint is designed to streamline and enhance your work at each step of the planning process. For the scope of today's webinar, we're going to focus on how UrbanFootprint helps customers sharpen their competitive edge in the proposal process. So I think as you all know, for many planning firms, proposals are a substantial pain point. Curating the data needed to make exhibits is typically a time-consuming and often a very expensive process. Plus, as we know, as planners, we know the competition for bids is substantial. UrbanFootprint's data and mapping capabilities help our customers put their best foot forward, allowing them to quickly create detailed existing conditions insights, make beautiful maps, and go the extra mile with in-depth scenario analysis. So in just a few minutes, we're going to hear from Kevin, Aaron, and Alyssa on how UrbanFootprint helps them create winning proposals. But to give you all some context, I'm going to spend just a few minutes now covering how UrbanFootprint's core capabilities support the key components of building an effective proposal. First, we're going to talk about existing conditions. So I talked about UrbanFootprint's base canvas. This is critical because it makes it easy to search for any U.S. location and then generate a preloaded land use map at the parcel scale. This includes insights in residential and employment mix, housing mix, and more. This partial canvas is complemented by an extensive data library, which allows us to layer on key environmental, transportation, equity data, and more. This means that we can quickly map and produce essential existing conditions exhibits for proposals, including current land use maps like the one you see here in our hometown in Berkeley, California. Existing zoning data can be added as well quite easily. We have zoning data curated for many cities across the country. Other data sets like property value and redevelopment potential are also included for just about the entire U.S. We can also quickly map and understand sort of basic things that we as planners are always looking to do, like existing mobility networks, including transit lines and stops like you see here, or roads by functional class. We have this data for the whole U.S. We have bikes and pedestrian paths and more, lots of different components that make up the mobility landscape, an ever-changing mobility landscape, I might add. We can map development patterns, housing types, employment mix. We can quickly filter to highlight patterns of specific land use types. In this example that you see here, we're able to highlight existing commercial parcels. And here's an exhibit for Berkeley, California. For more context, we can begin to easily chart the statistics that power the maps to get quick answers and produce exhibits that in some cases might otherwise be daunting or time-consuming. Plus, with the suite of these built-in analytical modules that I've mentioned before, we can include even more in-depth analyses that may have been cost-prohibitive to previously include, particularly at the proposal phase. This includes evaluating current emissions, vehicle miles traveled, energy use, and more. So walk and transit accessibility, often an essential component to any kind of complete existing conditions analysis, can be mapped with the click of a button. We can measure walk access to key destinations, including parks, jobs, schools, and more. We can even show extruded 3D analysis if we'd like, as you see the screen changing now. Similarly, we can visualize things like transit access to key destinations. In analysis mode, we can also view the percentage, for example, of residents that access these destinations within a certain time threshold. And this can be interesting and also critical information to integrate into a proposal as a way of really describing how you understand what is on the ground from day one. We also include a comprehensive risk and resilience analysis capabilities and data to inform not only where natural hazards may occur, but also who and what is potentially at risk in those areas. Here in our example for Berkeley, California, we can quickly show FEMA flood hazard zones. We can integrate area impacted by sea level rise. So we process and curate sea level rise data from across the country using state, regional, and federal data sets to get that done. Here we're adding liquefaction zones to the puzzle here and fire risk areas. You can see our hometown of Berkeley has a substantial number of different risk factors as we can see mapped here. All of this can be easily exported and integrated into a proposal, an interview presentation, or existing conditions report. So we've started to get into this, but we all know that when it comes to proposals and presentations, eye-catching maps are essential to creating a compelling bid. So in UrbanFootprint, we make this a lot easier by including the data and the tools you need to publish beautiful maps with little or no GIS experience required. You can easily switch between different base maps to adjust overall look and feel and toggle layers on or off to give your map the right level of detail. User-friendly design presets allow the user to adjust fill ramps, classes, stroke, opacity, and even 3D data extrusion. Each data set is going to come out of the box with a default symbology curated by our team of data scientists and planners. You can also easily customize this to your needs, of course, to create the map that, just as you need it. For example, here you can see customizable color ramps and classifications in action. Plus, 3D visualization offers another way to convey key data patterns. For example, in this map, we can easily understand patterns in residential versus employment locations in Oakland, California. The system also makes it a lot easier to publish high-quality map exhibits. It allows you to export maps quickly, very quickly, to presentations, to proposals and reports. You can export maps alone, include legends and logos, and even export layers to other products like Adobe Illustrator. So just quickly, we're going to step forward from mapping an existing condition into the scenario workflow, which is the ability to build and quickly test and iterate on ideas and alternatives throughout the planning process, even in the proposal phase. You can use the system to test changes to land use and existing conditions, to policy or technical assumptions, or to a combination of both. Testing a land use option for your project in UrbanFootprint is relatively straightforward because the system is preloaded with parcel level land use and reference data, as well as built-in development workflows. You can do a quick test of an option just minutes after you set up a project, and this means you can integrate this kind of information into a proposal. Because this can be used to inform a proposal or discuss how you might integrate scenario development into a project after you win the bid. So many of our customers have found this opens up opportunities to include in-depth analysis that would have previously been out of scope for proposal work, and oftentimes gives them a leg up on the competition. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Kevin Tilbury, who's a senior associate at Cambridge Systematics, to walk us through a proposal case study. Kevin, take it away.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. Hi, everyone. Thank you again for joining us this afternoon. As Joe mentioned, my name is Kevin Tilbury. I'm with Cambridge Systematics. For those of you who don't know who we are a transportation planning and policy analysis firm. We have locations across the U.S. We work mostly with NPOs, DOTs, and municipal governments on everything from policy analysis to performance management to system and corridor planning. But personally, my passion is integrated transportation and land use planning. And I really enjoy using sort of cool new tools to help sort of answer that question about transportation land use integration and how we can make the two work together. And so I'm going to talk a little bit about that today, specifically about a proposal, a successful proposal effort recently for the NPO MAPA in Omaha, Nebraska. The specific opportunity was an RFP to conduct a transit corridor study connecting downtown Omaha across the river into Iowa, into downtown Council Bluffs, and you can see that there on the screen. And so this was an RFP for firms to actually go in and look at different alternatives, whether that be BRT or streetcar, for connecting the two. And so whenever, and everyone on the phone knows this, whenever you go into a proposal, what you're trying to do, you're not going in there by yourself. You're competing with other firms and other teams. And so you're trying to determine how do you outshine the competition. And you see I've got the Patriots on the screen. Let me be clear. I'm not a Patriots fan. I'd even go as far to say I hate the Patriots. But those guys always win. And the reason why, they don't always get the best talent, but they're prepared. They're always prepared. So that's the lesson that we can take away from them is going into proposal, do your homework. Show the selection committee that you're prepared. So normally, in order to do a lot of digging, it takes a lot of time and effort, but we have UrbanFootprint at our disposal for this proposal, so we decided to put that to work. And so we were able to show them that we had already started to look at the corridor and to sort of tell a story. And just a few examples here. One of the things that stood out to us is this sort of mismatch between jobs and housing. You can see it's almost like housing is specifically avoiding this corridor, but there is employment clustered around it. So one of the questions that we could answer is, could high capacity transit serve as a catalyst to possibly better integrate housing and jobs? But when you zoom out to a larger scale, you can see that you've got dense employment clusters in downtown Omaha, and then also in Council Bluffs, but in between where our corridor is, there's not as much employment. And so then it becomes a question of, are we looking for high capacity transit to link these two employment centers, or are we looking at it as a catalyst for growth within the corridor itself? So that's one of the questions that we thought we could answer as part of this proposal. And then the other item is that we used UrbanFootprint's accessibility module to look at access to existing transit in the corridor. And as you can see there, thanks to that historic sort of grid network, it's already got good bones. So there's already good potential there for walking and therefore access to transit. So we were able to use the existing data sets and analytical capabilities to tell, kind of a really cool story. But we thought, what else can we do to really make ourselves stand apart from the competition? So we dug a little bit deeper into the RFP, and we saw that they very specifically said, we want to look at land use scenarios too. So This was over the summer. Basketball season was over. Football season hadn't started. I had a little bit of extra time on my hands one Sunday afternoon. So I said, I'm going to, explore this scenario planning approach a little bit more. So the conventional way in our proposal that we would do this is we would explain, well, this is what we did before. And so the example that I'm showing here is work that we did in Chattanooga for a rail study doing scenario planning. And, we did do that. We explained what we did, but we said, let's go a little bit further and give them a taste of what we might do within this quarter. So we were aware that they had already completed a Broadway, a quarter plan. The quarter's name is Broadway. They had already done a master plan for the corridor that prescribed specific types of development. And so we were able to use that to go in and sort of test what that might look like if we were to actually play out that development that's been prescribed. So we looked at the corridor was divided up into 4 different clusters of opportunity sites, and we were able to mine the master plan to try to figure out the densities and intensities associated with those opportunity sites. And then in the building type module in UrbanFootprint, we were able to actually build those place types and replicate that as a scenario. And so the next few slides, Joe could just sort of click through this pretty quickly. We looked at what the corridor looks like today and what it would look like under this Broadway master plan scenario. And you can see there's some additional population, some additional jobs. It sort of moved the needle a little bit, but not really to the catalytic potential of transit. And so we sort of understood why they were asking for scenario planning as part of this project. They thought maybe the master plan sort of maybe undershot the development potential of the corridor, especially when you bring in a catalyst like high capacity transit. So we said, okay, let's create a third scenario, but let's give them something that they can relate to. And so we went into UrbanFootprint's library of existing place types, and we tried to pull one out that was sort of in the Midwest, nothing like in Seattle or California, something a little more with more of a Midwest flavor. So we picked a place called Kinsey Flats near downtown Cincinnati, and so we could actually go in and get a snapshot of what that place would actually look like, and then what the densities and intensities were. You can see this is a more intense place type than what their master plan had envisioned. So we created a third scenario, as you can see there, and it really did move the needle. So you can see significantly more employment, significantly more households within the corridor. So this began to capture the catalytic potential of transit. One of the other things that was interesting that we were able to show is that there were some benefits. So in terms of efficiency, transportation cost efficiency, all those types of things, they're in good shape. But one thing that they wanted to pay attention to is, I think everyone is probably familiar with the flooding that region experienced earlier this year. And so we did want to point out that something we need to be aware of is that this quarter is in the floodplain, so that we are putting additional people and jobs at risk by doing that. And we were able to use the resiliency module to sort of tell that story as well. So that was our pitch. And at the end, 20 years of consulting, I've never had this happen. We stopped, and normally you get questions, and there were no questions. And so we thought, man, either we hit a home run or they think we're a bunch of idiots. And I still don't know the answer to that question, but we won the job. So all's well that ends well. And, it was specifically because of the approach that we took, because they told us this is exactly what we want to do. We want to test out development potential in the corridor and the potential for value capture and things like that. So I guess to wrap things up, the takeaways are that, in order to have a winning proposal, what's going to set you apart is that it's graphically rich. Don't use words. Tell images and pictures to tell the story. Tell a story. So in this case, we told a story about what the corridor is today and what the potential could be. And, we thoughtfully considered existing context as part of that. So we showed what the existing population and employment is in the corridor, and then how we can integrate future development. And to the extent that you're able to, not just show what we've done before, so don't just show examples of what we've done elsewhere, but put it in terms that they can relate to. So show what we can do for you within the context of your place, and that's the example that we just showed. So so that's what we did, and in this case, it was very successful, and we were able to use UrbanFootprint as an integral part of that. So I'm going to stop now and turn it back over, and then I'll be happy to answer questions later. Thank you.
Hey, thanks so much, Kevin. That is much appreciated, and I think just really unpacks very specifically how Urban Footprint can be used specifically in the proposal process to really convey a solid understanding of existing conditions. And then what I think is so exciting is the ability to, even at the proposal phase, begin to iterate about what's possible and integrate some of that what's possible into the pursuit and proposal phase. And I think that then begins to really generate great ideas, and ultimately those great ideas continue to evolve and become better plans over time in the actual planning process. So I'm going to turn it over to the good folks at OHM. OHM Advisors, these are folks that are coming to us from Columbus, Ohio. We've got Aaron Dominy, principal with OHM, and Alyssa Sexton, who's a planner with OHM, who've been using Urban Footprint in multiple steps of the planning process, and they're going to focus on how they've been using it in the proposal phase. So Aaron, Alyssa, take it away.
Okay, thanks, Joe, and hello to everybody on the call today. And Kevin, that presentation was great. Second time I've seen it, and I learned even more this time, so thanks for that. We're going to talk about the way we use it here at OHM, and I think maybe a slightly different perspective than what Kevin gave, which is kind of that one project, one lens and one strategy, and we're going to look at multiple ways that we use it on the proposal process. So one of the first things I wanted to do is give you a little bit of background about who we are. We're an architecture, engineering, and planning firm based in Columbus with multiple offices throughout the Midwest, from the UP down to Nashville, Tennessee. And I think it's interesting to use the tool kind of in this geography, which is a little bit different than a lot of the things Joe has shown us over the years, because we just have different metrics that we look at, and I'll talk about that a little bit as we get into the presentation, specific to our geography. One of the things I wanted to point out, not to tell everybody more about who we are on the phone, but rather I wanted to point out is that we are using this tool in multiple disciplines. So in engineering space, architecture, planning, and urban design, not so much construction, engineering, and surveying, but for those on the line who maybe touch those different spaces, there's a breadth of way that you can use Urban Footprint to kind of advance your mission and your purpose forward. So I wanted to throw that out there, and I covered that, so keep going, Joe. I wanted to outshine Kevin, so if anybody knows anything about Columbus, we're pretty prideful on our football here, so it is football season, so I had to make a joke and say, we too use this tool to outshine the competition, but I don't loathe the Buckeyes maybe like he does the Patriots, so wanted to put that in for a little bit of fun. One way that actually two ways we're using the tool right now is both for our public sector clients and private sector clients. So we operate in both spaces. With the private sector, one of the ways we're helping kind of advance that line of work forward is really helping our clients communicate a development intent prior to putting in a development application to a community. So that scenario planning tool is really valuable in that space. But today we're just going to talk about the public sector space, but wanted to plant the seed for folks on the phone that are using or doing work in the private sector. There's a pretty strong purpose for Urban Footprint in that space as well. So there's a cadence to the proposal process. I'm sure everybody kind of follows something similar to this here, which is either you receive the RFP or you create the opportunity. You kind of examine that and you make your go, no go. You build your strategy in the proposal, and then there's that interview and win space. So we're going to talk about each one of these in each step. So the first is whether you receive the RFP or you create the opportunity, there's that initial engagement to the project. So one of the ways that we wanted to share with everybody on the phone that we're using the tool, or it's been successful for us, is really creating the opportunity. So one of our first stories is here in Reynoldsburg, Ohio. This is a community of about 40,000 people just on the east side of Columbus. And we provide ongoing planning services for this client. So for us, we call this an annuity client, maybe you use the same vernacular. So on a day-to-day basis, we're helping them solve complex problems. And so in this next slide, you'll see there's multiple ways that we started to present Urban Footprint to them to kind of demonstrate what's happening within the community. And so we looked at things like accessibility to the park and amenities and transit, so really using this walkability tool and accessibility tool to our advantage to demonstrate that there are certain conditions happening in the community related to access that could potentially elevate the overall quality of life. this actually turned into a further conversation once our clients started to see the tool related to retail. So there's this conversation happening nationally about retail, and this community, like so many other communities you may work with and that we work with, is over-retailed. And that was one of the key challenges or questions they were trying to solve. And we used the tool to kind of uncover this condition, which was this idea that there's 55 square feet of retail per person, and how that almost doubled the national average. And so this really led to them taking on the next step of doing a comprehensive plan and trying to solve the over-retailing of their primary corridors. So I wanted to share that with you, in that it's an unconventional way to use the tool, but it can be a really powerful marketing scenario for you if you use it the right way to uncover some challenges that a community has. The next step of the process is really that examining the opportunity. And I shared this with Joe the other day that we were going to talk about this. So once we actually have the RFP in hand, there are also always a number of questions that we're asking ourselves of whether we chase that work. Can we work within the budget? Are our team members available? Do we have an understanding of that community prior to this RFP coming out? How well do we demonstrate our relevant experience? So those are all things that we ask ourselves, and we're still working through maybe how we use the tool creatively at this point in the process. And I think there are creative ways that we can do it. We haven't really dove into that too much to help us make those informed go-no decisions. However, when we know we can use the tool creatively, like Kevin showcased, and it may help elevate us from the competition, we're definitely going to keep doing that. I think that's going to start to inform our go-no, but it hasn't quite yet. So I kind of challenge the audience to help us think creatively about using UrbanFootprint at this step of the process as well. However, we are using it to help build the strategy. So this is once we have the RFP in hand and we've made that kind of informed go-no decision, how can we craft a strategy similar to Kevin in terms of our approach and how we're chasing the actual work? So Alyssa's going to share with us some thoughts on that.
Yeah, so as we're trying to start to build this strategy, we're trying to, understand what's going on within the city, what are their major concerns, and how can we help them solve those issues. So the example that we have for you here is Whitehall, Ohio, which is an inner ring suburb of Columbus, mostly built out in the 50s and 60s, and they were looking at developing a comprehensive plan for the city. And as part of that, knowing that there's a lot of growth that's going to occur in central Ohio, the region that they're located in, and they're trying to look at how could they accommodate that growth within their city. And so during the proposal process, we sort of revealed this tool that we had been using, UrbanFootprint, and letting them know that this would help them make decisions on how they might grow along their major corridors. And so this was an example. Once we won the project, we shared with the city and the steering committee different types of mixed-use growth along the corridors and sort of the stats related to that, the number of additional residents and jobs and how that would affect transportation within the city, and so that they were able to make informed decisions. And this resulted in us creating an actual plan for one of these areas in the city, and we've got a rendering of that here on the next slide. But coming from that, this really took a large planning effort, and being able to make those informed decisions before we get into designing was really important for this community. And it started during that proposal process.
Yeah, I think it's important to note, too, for the audience, and Joe will appreciate this, in that Central Ohio has been a pretty significant adopter of this tool, and it really was our MPO. So for us to actually have the tool in our toolkit, be trained and know how to deploy it, and sell that as part of our approach was pretty powerful because it was becoming a common vernacular within the region. The next place that we've used this successfully is in Berkeley, Michigan, not Berkeley, California, where Joe is, but the Berkeley, Michigan. And Berkeley, Michigan sits on Woodward Avenue just outside of Detroit, Woodward and 11 miles. So for any folks who are super planning nerds on the phone and know the history of Detroit and how it was developed, it's on one of the spokes coming out of downtown. And this community, Joe, if you go to the next slide, really asked us, and again, you see that urban footprint showing that tool in our proposal as something we're going to use. We actually use the tool in the proposal to demonstrate ways in which this corridor could grow and develop. And then we showed this as an example in the interview. So you can see 11 Mile there where that color is changing. And we started to show how different land use scenarios could be developed along this corridor and integrated into these historic neighborhoods next to them, which is a really hot button issue for them. I'm not going to show you all of the scenario metrics that came out of the scenario planning with that, but the point is, with the proposal, we demonstrated we had an innovative tool. We then showed some of these flashy maps within the presentation and then revisited it actually in the interview process to demonstrate to them our deeper level of understanding of their challenges and how it moves forward. The next example is in Cleveland, Ohio. We're working currently in Cleveland and in the Cuyahoga River Valley. This is in the kind of interview and win space. So once we put the proposal in, got to the dance, how do we use this in that interview space?
Yeah, so as Aaron noted before, we have an office in Cleveland and our staff are really excited about this project, very familiar with the Cuyahoga River and sort of the history there. But we wanted to come into the interview with more than just our understanding as Clevelanders. We wanted to have, be able to start to show opportunities within the River Valley, and we were able to use Urban Footprint to do that. So you'll see on the left here, we're showing potential areas for redevelopment based on market improvement to land value ratio. So the red, orange properties are going to be potential redevelopment sites. On the right-hand side, you'll see publicly owned properties. So these are spaces that we might leverage for future development or connections or open space and recreational space. And so we didn't necessarily come to the city with answers, but we sort of showed that this is a way that we could approach to start to answer some of those questions for them. Next slide, please. And so when we're going into an interview process or really throughout that whole interaction with the client, we're showing them these tools that we have. Here you'll see drone footage that we took about a month ago for this Vision for the Valley project. And so urban footprint, drone footage, those sort of technologies are things that we share with the client and as opportunities once we have the project.
Yeah, one thing I wanted to point out too, just to kind of push the envelope a little bit, we're working on is how do we take the output of urban footprint and integrate it into drone photography so we have real-time photography. That is starting to become something we're exploring, and others may want to do that on the phone too. The last example that we're using the tool on, and I won't show all of our cards here because we're in the process of chasing this pursuit, is we worked on a project here in Columbus called Insight 2050, which was focused on how do we grow, which was the purpose of that was how do we grow 5 of our distinct corridors in central Ohio to accommodate another 1 million people coming here by 2050. And the tool was used as part of that process. And the MPO has the tool, and we built a land use model using Urban Footprint that essentially managed how these corridors are going to be planned and grown in the future. So coming out of that process, the city issued an RFP to study some other corridors to start to go from, okay, this is how we densify them, to how do we actually grow transit in these corridors. So this is one way that I think as this tool becomes more adopted, different MPOs are users of it. In the planning space, it's going to become more and more important to be familiar with Urban Footprint and how to engage with it, interact with it, because there's an evolution to it. It doesn't necessarily stop at one project, and it can continue to grow and snowball into other things within your regions too, depending on how it's used and applied. So just another example of the continuation and evolution of the tool within a region.
Okay, thank you everyone for that awesome presentation. Aaron, Alyssa, and Kevin, that was great. And thank you to our audience for taking the time to join us today. At this point, we're going to open things up for questions, so feel free to type things into the chat box. We even have Urban Footprint standing by to help illustrate exactly how to do certain things in the software. So if you have specific questions that are applicable there, Joe will be running the software to help illustrate things. So with that said, we're gonna give people a minute or two to type in any questions that they have. In the meantime, I'm going to launch a poll here. So if you're interested in getting a personalized demo of UrbanFootprint, feel free to respond appropriately, and we will follow up with you after the webinar. So as responses are coming in there, I guess the first question here, Joe, comes from Benjamin. Question had to do with the redevelopment potential data set that you were talking about early on in the presentation, basically looking for more information about that and how it could be used.
Yeah, great. That's a great question, Benjamin. Thank you. Yeah, so UrbanFootprint is going to come preloaded with what we call parcel reference data, which is mostly captured from local, county, and regional assessors. So we have that stitched together for the vast majority of the United States. So kind of anywhere where you can start a parcel project with UrbanFootprint, you're also going to get access to this parcel reference data. Actually, if you can see my screen, I am just bringing that up right now for Oakland, California, just a project that we had open. So you can actually see here. So that data we were showing off, and actually the data that Alyssa pointed out, I believe, in Cleveland, is this improvement to land value ratio. And so there's a whole series of different sort of data points in that reference data set, ranging from property value, improvement and land value, these ratios, vintage, and lots of other kind of primary source information, if you will, about the parcels. So that's data that we're going to have available in the system for just about anywhere you can start a project.
Okay, great. Thank you, Joe. And the next questions are for our panelists here. Do you find that the use of scenarios as part of a proposal, is this something that you did before and it was just harder to do, or is this something you're kind of now able to do using UrbanFootprint?
Hey, this is Kevin. I'm trying to scan my memory bank. I don't think that we actually did scenario analysis as part of a proposal previously, at least not from a quantitative standpoint, just simply because it would take a lot of effort to sort of build up that analysis. And as you guys are aware, there's sort of the risk reward, and you don't want to put too much resources and effort into a proposal if you're not going to win it. You've only got so much effort you can put into a proposal. So, no, I believe this is probably the first time that we've done that.
Okay.
I think it's the same for us as well. I mean, a lot of it was kind of back of the napkin sketch or quick Excel work. We weren't really doing that as part of the proposal process either. Just because there's too much risk to spend that much time if the ROI wasn't there.
Got it. Thank you. Another question for the panelists. This is from Eric. Can you maybe summarize how your proposal routine has changed since becoming an UrbanFootprint customer? Is the data collection process shorter? Are you able to, generate maps easier? Can you maybe summarize all of that?
I would say that we are just able to pull a lot more data than what we may have originally pulled for a proposal or an interview. That would be something that would just take too much time, and with UrbanFootprint, we're able to look at a lot of existing conditions quickly and decide whether or not they're meaningful for that specific city or place.
Another thing that we've done too, in addition to just being more efficient, is our proposal teams are fully aware of the tool and what its capacity is. So it doesn't, the way in which it's used and how we are thinking about using it in proposals doesn't stop at, call it the principal level or the project manager level. The folks that are actually facilitating the proposals are also looking for ways to use UrbanFootprint to make the proposal better. I think that's important to note if your company has an independent proposal team.
Yeah, I'll just echo what they said, is that I mean, we've done that before. We've looked at existing conditions data as part of the proposal process, but I think with UrbanFootprint we've probably gone into more depth and looked at different data sets, and also probably from an analytical standpoint done a little more effort there as well.
Okay, great. Thank you both. Next question is from Kate. This is directed at Kevin. Kevin mentioned doing a scenario on a Sunday afternoon. How long did it take him to complete the analysis for the example he shared?
So it probably took about 4 hours to do the analysis. Now, outside of that, what took additional time was actually mining the master plan and deriving the densities and intensities from that. That took a little bit more time. So that was probably outside of the Sunday afternoon, but actually, going in and selecting the building types, applying them to the corridor, and developing those performance measures, it was an afternoon. It was, 3 to 4 hours of casual work. I think I may have been streaming Netflix or something while I did it. So it was a relatively light lift.
We thought you were watching the Patriots.
No, it wasn't football season.
Oh, okay.
Okay, great. Thank you. This question is more for Joe, I think. Can you explain where Urban Footprint gets its data from? So if we're doing a proposal somewhere in the country, how do I know what Urban Footprint can do for me there?
Yeah, it's a great question. So we get our data from a number of different sources. Some of it is commercially sourced, data that we purchase, and also what we're doing is we're sort of scraping, cleaning, curating, and making actionable data sources from a number of different data sources and pipelines. So that might be federal census level data, HUD data sets, EPA data sets, Energy Information Administration data sets. For parcel data, we're doing a combination of sort of county and local data and commercially sourced data. We have point of interest data. So our team here is constantly either automatically through kind of call it technical pipelines or also manually just constantly looking for new data sets, making sure it's up to date, and then also kind of cleaning and curating and making sure that the first time it shows up with symbology. And so and symbology that makes sense. You can go in and modify it, but I think Aaron and Kevin both pointed out that, for example, maybe someone from the marketing department might put together a map, and that person may not be as familiar with certain data sets. Well, if, for example, I'm not saying you'd necessarily do this, you needed someone from your marketing department to quickly put together a map of sea rise in Oakland, which I've put together here on the screen in front of us, this is how that data would show up the first time, right? So we make sure that it sort of makes sense. We clean it. In many cases, like the sea rise data sets, in this particular case, this is getting to your source question. This is coming from the state of California, a data set called CalAdapt. At the federal level, it might come from NOAA or other locations. But what we've done is we've taken that CalAdapt data, which frankly comes in a relatively technical format. It's raster data. It actually doesn't show up on a map easily. So we process and clean that data so it shows up in a map, and then ultimately our models will use this data as well to produce analytics and help you understand like how many people, jobs, et cetera, are in those flood zones. So the short answer is data comes from a lot of different places, but there's a lot of processing that we're doing on our end to make sure that data shows up sensible, and for the most part, hopefully, beautiful from a cartographic perspective.
Okay, great. Next question here is from Kai. Does Urban Footprint offer some sort of tutorial or training for new users to learn how to best make use of the software?
Yeah, absolutely. So we go through, all of our users go through training and onboarding. We also have, as you'd expect from sort of any professional piece of software, now we've got the ability to access our team via chat, via email and other support. We have a whole host of sort of videos and online documentation and how-tos as well. All of our models are also heavily documented and white-papered. But yeah, the short answer is that we do walk folks through, particularly when, sort of companies are picking up the platform and using it from a number of folks. We'll go through training and onboarding. And in particular, the first 3 months of use of the platform is one in which we actually help you through some early use cases so that you're off and running. And so we straighten that line to you understanding how to deploy the system effectively.
Okay, very good. Next question here is from Jason. So the question is, are you able to coordinate more teams within the planning firm to address issues across, traditional boundaries or traditional organizational structures like economic development or resilience planning, because you have all of that information in UrbanFootprint. Is that something Alyssa, Kevin, and Aaron, you guys are seeing?
This is Kevin, and before I answer that question, I'll add that the example that I showed, I was a relatively new user at the time, and so I actually got some help from the folks at UrbanFootprint to put together some of the maps that I showed there in the presentation. As far as collaboration, yes, the way that UrbanFootprint works is that if you're an administrator, you can give anyone in your organization that's registered to be a user access to that tool. And because it exists in the cloud, you don't have to worry about sort of passing files around or making sure they're on a central location on a server somewhere like traditional GIS. It's all sort of available in the cloud, so it's just it's a pull-down menu, and you select a project, and boom, you can go in and see the work that's already been done. One of your colleagues has already done. So I work remotely, so I work with folks all over the country, and so it's easy for me to kind of go in and collaborate with people on different things because it's cloud-based that way. So I hope that answers your question. Yeah,
we have planners in Detroit and Cleveland that are using the tool with us as well on the same projects, so we're all able to manipulate data, look at the same things. So it's pretty collaborative across geographies.
Yeah, and a lot of people might not necessarily know how to use something like ArcMap GIS, but UrbanFootprint is a little bit more intuitive and quick to pick up. So it's definitely been a helpful tool for people who may not be as familiar with GIS in our office.
Okay, great. We'll take a last call for questions here, so feel free to ask whatever remaining questions you have. One question came in from Joaquin. How often is the data updated in the software?
Data updates, again, based on that earlier answer, it's going to vary. Parcel data is updated roughly every quarter. Other data sets are updated as they're updated. So we have pipelines to the sort of source data sets. So, something like census might be updating on every 2-year, 5-year, or even 10-year flows. But if, for example, the map you're looking at now, which is California's sea rise and fire risk data, if that data updates, our system is notified of that update, and then we'll process and update that. So if that's updating monthly, we're right around on that monthly cadence. If it's updating less often, it'll be as such. And so that really does vary based on the inbound data set. There are hundreds of data sets in the system. One thing I'll also take this opportunity to point out is that there are more and more we're starting to see pull for the integration of either real-time or closer to real-time data into the platform. So we actually have a new partnership that we've established with a number of different folks, but I think one of the more exciting ones right now is streetlight data. So a number of you actually might already use or be aware of streetlight data, sort of big transportation data, roadway congestion, volume, multimodal data, and that's processed off sort of like large-scale GPS data. So our customers can now also convey streetlight data into the platform directly, and that what allows you to do is sort of really light up in a very actionable way, like roadway segment level, like volume and congestion data, origin destination data, things that you might typically be using for, call it travel model calibration and things like that, can now also be used to bring that data to life and intersect it with the different data sets in UrbanFootprint. That can be used, potentially in the proposal phase, but certainly at an existing conditions and a planning level. So again, the answer is that it really varies, but what we're doing, we have an entire team now here dedicated to sort of the freshness, if you will, of that data. And I'll also just point out here, if you can see my screen again, is that as I look at these different data sets, or if I go into my, there's going to be a lot of source information. We're going to link to source, and then when you actually view data through our catalog or layer manager, as it's called, all that information, including last updated, and direct links to source and metadata are going to be in there as well. So the kinds of things you'd expect or need to know about the data sets. So here, for example, schools, California, we're looking at this is from the California School Campus Database. It's date and scale. It's updated regularly, and then there's metadata that goes along with that. And so that's going to be the case with every data set in the system. There's going to be that kind of information provided as well.
Okay, that takes us to the conclusion of our webinar today. So on behalf of Joe, myself, and the rest of the Urban Footprint team, we'd like to thank Kevin, Aaron, and Alyssa for their time and insights today. And I'd like to thank everyone who attended for being here and sharing your time with us and for asking some great questions. Thank you and have a good rest of your day.
Thank you.